Do you often wonder why people who speak the same language sound different? Why is there British English and why is there American English, and why do they sound so different? What you're actually noticing are regional accents. Regional accents are something that is pretty much normal with every language. And in this video, we will explore what exactly are regional accents, why they occur. And if you like videos like this, be sure to subscribe and give us a like. So let's start learning. Hi, my name is Grisel Bennett. I'm one of the linguistics specialists and English educators at Unbounded Education. And today we will be talking about regional accents. If you haven't watched our videos about foreign accents, be sure to watch it here. Essentially, foreign accents are when you apply the same phonological rules of your native language onto your second language or your foreign language. And this is something that is pretty much unconscious. And this is very different from regional accents. Regional accents are when there are two people who speak the same language, but they speak differently. And there are essentially different dialects. And here is a little example of a foreign accent.
An anonymous love letter that you received. Well, it's everything. Maybe that's the reason why also I'm not working a lot. You know? Because I like to find a director who will, enrich me.
As you could tell from this video, this is a native French speaker. When she speaks English, she uses the same phonological rules in French and applies those rules while she is speaking English. And as the listener hears this, we would essentially perceive that as having a French accent or a foreign accent. And this is very different from a regional accent. To start, from a linguistic standpoint, everyone has an accent. For example, I have an American accent when I speak English, and your accent tells a little bit about you. It tells people where you're from. You may be wondering, why do accents exist? Well, the short answer is essentially they just develop over time. But the real answer is a little bit more convoluted. The word accent from a linguistic standpoint refers to pronunciation, and this can be influenced by various factors. For example, country, geographical region, socioeconomic status, and many more. In other words, accent only refers to pronunciation. And this is important because accent is actually a part of a bigger picture, a dialect. Dialect is essentially a variety of a language, and this includes grammar, accent, and more. For example, there's Southern American English and there's received pronunciation in the UK. Dialects and accents can be contributed to four main reasons. That would be language learning, language contact, social differentiation, and the natural processes in usage. Generally speaking, different varieties of the same language usually tend to develop when there are isolated groups of people. And the longer that these groups of people are isolated from one another, the more likely that they will have different identifiable accents. For example, let's take the USA and Australia. These regions were first settled by British settlers. Nowadays, I don't sound like an Australian, and Australians don't sound like me. So what this can be contributed to is the influence of local languages, the different development of our varieties of English, independent changes, and immigration. You may be wondering, why all of a sudden do these accents develop once we're isolated from one another? And this is contributed to language learning. In a simple sense, as children learn a language, they have to develop the grammar on their own. There's pretty much no one there to help them learn the language. Yes, there are other speakers of the language, but it is essentially up to the child to construct and develop the grammar on their own in their mind. The child will then be able to learn the language through trial and error. Linguists believe that every individual has their own specific grammar that is unique to them. So what this means is, although we essentially speak the same language, there are certain minute differences as each child learns a language. And what this means is that there may be some small pronunciation differences and small grammatical differences as well. If this is picked up by other people in the community, then this can essentially become an accent or a dialectal change. However, in real life, this is not the only influence that there is on dialects and accents. If there's another language that is used in close proximity, it can have an influence on another language or an accent. This change will be associated with language contact. I'll be using the example of Cajun English, not to be confused with New Orleans English. This accent is highly influenced by the French language. The reason why this accent is very different from other accents in the United States is because of the early semi-isolation of the state of Louisiana. Louisiana was originally a part of French and Spanish territory, and the United States acquired Louisiana through the Louisiana Purchase. The main language at the time of its purchase was French, or Louisiana Creole, which is a Creole language derived from French. When Louisiana was creating its constitution, there was a decision to make English the language of instruction. Although there was a change in what was essentially the main language of the region, this did not really affect the Cajuns, who are the descendants of modern-day Acadians from present-day New Brunswick, Canada. These Cajun peoples, who were essentially a large portion of the people groups in Louisiana, lived primarily in small towns and mostly exclusively communicated only in French and or Louisiana Creole. In addition, most of these individuals were poor and did not receive any education. Because of this, the children of the French speakers often did not go to school or did not have a consistent education. Therefore, a new dialect of English started to develop, and this dialect was highly influenced by French, and thus came forth Cajun English, which is highly influenced by French in regards to pronunciation and vocabulary. Here's a little example of someone using the Cajun English dialect.
And then he went with the gun over her, and I guess she was begging with him not to shoot her again. I went and got my pistol and put it in my pocket in case he come and bust my door. They told him to lay down, and he lay down by her with his hand stretched out. But he didn't have no gun by then. He went and hid. Oh, I was nervous. I couldn't even call the cops.
A third aspect that can influence the development of a dialect and accent is social differentiation. Using the same example of Cajun English, this variety of English was mostly spoken by people of the lower socioeconomic class in Louisiana, and it was essentially frowned upon. The individuals living in a higher socioeconomic class in Louisiana did not use the Cajun accent, and they essentially spoke differently. And another example of which is the received pronunciation in UK. This accent is essentially known as the most prestigious accent, and the general public in Britain does not use this specific accent. So what this means is there are essentially two different groups living in the same area, same city, same region, and even though they live in the same areas, they essentially are still isolated because people of different socioeconomic classes do not necessarily interact with each other very often. Thus, this allows for new accents to develop. Race can also be a factor as well. For example, the Black community in the United States was often isolated from the larger white community. This, along with other influences, allowed for the development of African American Vernacular English, also known as AAVE. We will be making a future video about this dialect because it is also very impactful and it's also very interesting. The last possible way accents can develop is the natural process in usage, and this reason is essentially based on historical linguistics. I will try to keep this section a little bit more concise because historical linguistics can get a little bit complicated, but the four most relevant terms that we will discuss today are assimilation, disassimilation, syncope, and apocope. Assimilation is when there is a sound that is next to or adjacent to another sound and it changes the pronunciation of another sound in order to be similar to it. Disassimilation is when there are two sounds that are the same or similar and they become differentiated. Syncope and apocope are when there is the loss of medial and final sounds. I will give you a little example of assimilation. In the sentence, I live in Montreal, the N in the word in sounds like an M, and this is called bilabelization. And this occurs because the N is being influenced by the M in Montreal to have a similar placement. I will say this sentence a little bit slower so it's more audible. I live in Montreal. I live in Montreal versus I live in Montreal. If this changed to the word in were to happen all across the board in all contexts, so that would make in to im in all contexts, then this would be a standardized change for a particular community. And if that were to happen, this would be a dialectal change. And this could also be attributed to accent as well. There are many changes such as this that have become standardized change across the history of various human languages. However, we will just keep it to this for today, and we will go more in depth in our future videos about historical linguistics. To sum up, an accent in a sociolinguistic sense is essentially a subset of a dialect. Accent only refers to pronunciation in regards to the dialect. There are various accents and dialects in various communities, and this is attributed to the isolation between those speakers of those communities. And the reasons of that being are language contact, language learning, social differentiation, and the natural process and usage. If you watched until the end of the video, be sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a like. This has been Grisel, and don't forget to keep learning.